and welcome to my channel. Welcome to another video from me. My name is Martine and I normally do videos mainly on astrology, especially Vedic astrology, but also with some tropical astrology insights. But today's topic is going to be something else. So I also do videos like these where I just talk about my opinions on different topics, more philosophical questions, social themes, or just anything that goes through my mind. So if you are here for this video until the end, I want to thank you in advance for listening. And of course, feel free to comment and chip in with your opinions. I would greatly love a discussion. Of course, keep it civil. I will mention that. Another thing that I want to say is I do consultations. So I do consultations on both astrology and tarot. And you can check out the video description for my contact information. You can email me for a pricing list and reading options. So I do astrological readings on a wide variety of topics, from career, transits, Lagna readings, which have to do with the outer image and how you are perceived. Classes of people, which classes of people will help you in life, who are the ones who are going to attack you in life, and so on and so forth. If you want to find out more about Arudha Lagna, you can check out my playlist where I talked about, the Arudha Lagna in Karakamsha. Arudha is spelled Arudha. Lagna is Lagna. So Lagna is basically Vedic astrology term for ascendant. So I also do, all kinds of compatibility readings, synastry readings, and so on. But basically I cover any topic that is requested. It's just that the prices will differ depending on the complexity of the reading. And I also do tarot readings. So if you're interested in tarot, you can check out the video that I will link, the channel that I will link in the video description, as well as in the pinned comment. So I have a tarot channel. If you're interested in tarot, go ahead and check it out. Maybe subscribe. And more recently, I have created members only sections on my channel. So just very briefly, I can tell you that the members options, so each level gets an extra video per month, and that's basically between the first of this month until the first of the last month. So I can't always promise that I will be posting them, in every Monday or anything like that, but I will be posting at least 3 extra videos, 1 per each membership level, between the first of the current month and the first of the next month. So, and the topics will be, so the first level is just, again, on any astrologically related topic that I can think of. And of course, if you become a member, you will get to vote on topics and you will get to request topics in members only polls and comments. And the second level is going to be especially dedicated to more synastry-oriented or relationship-oriented topics. So this can be, let's say, more composite chart or synastry analysis for famous couples, or different configurations, including looking at divisional charts and how this can influence, a person's romantic life, compatibilities between nakshatras, etc., so on and so forth. And the last level of membership will be, let's say, a little bit more complex than the rest of the topics. I'm going to try to be focusing mostly on nakshatras, on divisional charts, and, more, let's say, sophisticated topics of astrology that, take more in-depth knowledge. But I will try to make the playlists public so you can check them out. You can see all the videos that I posted in each member's playlist up until this point. Of course, you won't be able to see the actual videos unless you purchase the membership. And of course, if you want to find out more about how much each subscription is, each level of subscription, you can just click the join button. It's not really important for me to say because, of course, the currency changes based on your location. So if you click the join button next to any of my videos, you will see how much it costs per each level. And another important thing that I want to say is that for each member level, you have access to the previous level. So If you are like tier 1, level 1 membership, you have 1 extra video per month. If you are level 2, you have 2 extra videos per month. So you have level 2 and level 1. If you have level 3 membership, then you have 3 extra videos per month. You have, the level 1, level 2, and level 3 videos. And of course, once you become members, depending on my time, I will say, but you can start requesting more. So I might be posting more than just these 3 videos per month, depending on how many requests I get. All right. So this is something that I wanted to mention about memberships. And let me get straight into the topic because I've already talked too much off topic. So again, this is one of those videos that I did threaten, quote unquote, to talk about for a while now, because it's probably not the most politically correct topic, and it is about women's needs in relationships. I have sort of done videos where I talked about similar topics, and I will try to link all the related videos that I will mention in this video in the video description, as well as in the pinned comment. So if you want to find out more about them, anything that I'm referencing, go check out the video description. So, this topic of women's needs. So again, I will mention some disclaimers in the beginning. These are my opinions based on my observations. Of course, everything is open to discussion. If you want to comment pro and con, of course, you are free to do so in the comment section. Just please, be polite. Don't use foul language, the general rules of civility. And another disclaimer is that, all right, this is a complicated, complex thing to talk about. And I will be, mentioning some things as well as I go along, because I would normally divide women's needs into 2 categories. And one category are things that are beyond the control of men. So just to be clear, I'm going to focus here mainly on heterosexual relations, because obviously I'm talking about biological women and biological men. Because the whole point of this video is for me to explain what I think, especially being a biological woman, women need, and how these needs are being ignored in society today, and how this is leading to epidemics of singleness, aloneness, solitude, I don't know, and also decreasing natality, which is a big thing you constantly hear about. And I honestly think that these issues are so obvious. I can't believe that people are debating why natality is going down. So I will get into this again as I progress. But going back to the idea that there are two main categories, right? So the first category are things that are, let's say, things that are geopolitical in nature, socio-economical in nature. So for instance, the fact that a lot of countries are not doing well financially, that could lead to women not getting their needs met, of course. Women need security, and if they live in a war zone, there's no way you can feel secure in a war zone. And this all stems from biological imperatives, because women carry the child, and being pregnant is a huge vulnerability for women, so they need security. So and this is ingrained actually in every animal, to a large extent, but especially for women and other mammals, where the female carries the fetus inside her body, and that puts her in a especially high risk of death even, but all kinds of ailments. Basically, it's a state of massive vulnerability for a woman to be pregnant. So that's why women need security. And a lot of the things, so first category of influence are things that basically are beyond men's or individual men's sphere of control, right? So, like I said, geopolitical stuff, socio-economical stuff, to a large extent out of the control of the individual man. Meaning how a man behaves in a relationship with a woman. That's what I'm talking about. Now, of course, collectively, men do also influence things like socioeconomic situations and geopolitical stuff and chauvinism or lack thereof, of course. Yeah. But when it comes to the individual man and what he can control with respect to how he treats women, these are not things that he can do much about, all right? And then there's the second category that I'm mainly going to be focusing on in this video that I really want to talk about, because these are the parts that the individual men are responsible for when it comes to how they relate to women, to which extent they meet women's needs and all this stuff. And yeah, this is the second category of why women are not getting their needs met. And really, I would say a large reason why natality is going down, why people are single, why women are not focused on relationships so much, is mainly to do with the way that individual men treat women, and the fact that they either don't care or they don't want to meet women's needs in relationships. That's what it all boils down to. So let me break it down. What are the main things, without too much beating around the block, because I already have been beating around the block too much. The main thing that women need in relationships, all right, is security. That's it. And what do I mean by security? See, I think a lot of men sort of understand that women need security, but they take that to just mean money. So they think that, if I have a nice job, if I have a good car, if I live in a nice neighborhood, if I work for a Fortune 500 company or any kind of, whatever, international, multinational, corporate, whatever, if I'm a lawyer, a doctor, women are going to be all over me, right? Yes and no. All right. To be fair, money for a guy is kind of like looks for a woman. So, in a sense, I actually agree with Marilyn Monroe in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes on this, because this snippet of her movie where she said, "Oh my goodness, don't you know that a man being rich is like a woman being pretty? You wouldn't marry a woman just because she's pretty, but my goodness, doesn't it help?" That's literally what she said in the movie where she's playing this dumb blonde, quote unquote, in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, I think it was the movie. And this actually is similar to actually what she said. I kind of agree. Not entirely, but I kind of agree in the sense that money for a guy is kind of like looks for a woman, in the sense that it gets him through the door, right? It gets him noticed, So women will pay attention when you have, let's say, a good job, if you get your shit together one way or another. Pardon my French. You have a nice job, you make decent money, you have a respectable profession. These kinds of things will make you notice. And of course, if on top of that, you also look nice. Yes, that's also very important nowadays, especially. But yeah, it will get you noticed, but that is not going to keep a woman, invested in a relationship. That's nowhere near enough. A lot of men, again, I'm trying not to get ahead of myself. So this is the main thing that I wanted to say. The same thing with looks for a woman, right? So being pretty might be enough to get you noticed, but if you have a horrible personality, if you don't match this guy's lifestyle or expectations, if you're not interested in maternity or whatever, most guys will not be interested. A lot of guys, okay? Maybe not most. But I would say, yeah, maybe I can stretch it and say most guys would not be interested in a woman who doesn't want to have kids, really. Or if she's not, let's say if she has some kind of radical ideas that he doesn't agree with or whatever, etc., right? You catch my drift. So, and by the way, this video is meant for anyone. I don't care. So this is not about, I think it's useful for both men and women to at least think about this topic. It doesn't mean that they have to agree with every little thing that I say. And of course, you're free to disagree in the comments. I would absolutely invite that, especially with using logical arguments. And I think that I'm pretty logical, to be honest. And I think I have a very sharp observation of general trends. And I also look at how people are influenced by biology on a regular basis. I think people are much less complicated than we like to believe. I think so much of our behavior actually is boiling down to biology. Some very simple instincts, like the instinct to reproduce, the instinct to have a, social belonging and status and all this stuff, etc. But everything boils down to survival, because the animal side of us needs to survive, right? And so it's no different than any other organism, animal on the planet, really. at least when you compare it to other mammals, let's say, because those are the ones that we are closest to. Anyway, parenthesis. So, security. What do women know? What do I mean by security? So the first step of security, that's like the tip of the iceberg, all right, is money, all right? Now, here's the thing. Some women may care more about money than others. And I will get more into details as I progress with all the other layers of security. So there might be women who, for instance, the main thing that they care about from a man is to get material security, right? If a guy pays her bills and keeps her, in a cushy situation, comfortable, doesn't have to worry about money, that's all she needs, right? She doesn't need more from a guy. If she doesn't have to work for a living, she's happy. All right, that's one category of women. Other women, they don't care that much about. And I would say nowadays, most women, at least in the West, they actually don't care that much about material security. And this is a huge mistake that men make. And I'm going to get more into details as I progress with this. Another level of security is, of course, physical security. Physical security means feeling safe with a guy, right? Knowing that he has your back no matter what, right? That he respects your boundaries, very important. Physically, sexually, on every level, right? No means no, that kind of thing. They basically feeling safe. Anything that makes a woman feel unsafe around a guy is a deal breaker. Like, basically. And don't comment in the comment section with this stuff. Yeah, but what about these women and those women who put up with all kinds of crap? Those women have no self-respect. I'm talking about healthy women. I'm talking about the kind of women that would make healthy, decent wives and mothers. All right. These women would not put up with a guy who makes them feel unsafe, doesn't respect their boundaries, so on and so forth. All right, then there is emotional security. Well, they're all kind of interconnected, but, they're also separate. So emotional security means, can you trust this guy enough with your vulnerabilities? Can you be vulnerable around him? Or do you feel like you have to keep an image, because he can't handle your emotions? He's not going to be able to comfort you if you're depressed. Stuff like this. Also, of course, respecting your feelings, right? Not gaslighting you. So if you're saying I'm sad, you don't want to be with a partner who's like, well, that's stupid. Why are you sad? That is, like, that's like wrong response out. The right response is there, honey. Let me get you some chocolate and a warm blanket. That's the bare minimum response, like next level would be cuddles and kisses and stuff. Another thing, emotional, right? So emotional, another component of emotional, very importantly, that loads of men ignore, fidelity, right? Now, fidelity is, I know, a very controversial topic nowadays with this polyamorous shit that is being talked about. But I can actually break it down biologically why women care just as much about fidelity as men, if not even more. It comes from instincts. Like, I would never, honest to God, especially being a woman, if I were hypothetically right now to transform into a man, I would not want to be with a woman who tolerates infidelity, because the kind of women who tolerate infidelity don't give two shits about you, all right? They are there because you bring them the good life. Like, they are not loyal. This is why, as soon as you stop being able to bring them the good life, let's say you lose your job, I don't know, whatever the hell is going on, like, whatever, yeah, crisis happens, you lose your business, guess what? She's gonna go on and latch on to the next guy who can give you comfort, right? Who can give her the comfortable life. Because she doesn't really care about you. Like, if a woman says, I don't care if my husband, boyfriend, partner, whatever, sleeps with other women, that is the equivalent of her saying, I don't care if he gets hit by a bus. Like, it's literally that level of emotional involvement. And if a woman is not really emotionally involved in the relationship, she's not really for you. She's constantly plotting games and strategies to keep you providing financially. Right? She's going to bat her eyelashes at the right time and, put efforts into her looks and use her sexuality to entice and whatever, but she's not really loyal. Unless you have, and again, fidelity in general, sexual, emotional, on every plane, is a very strong component of emotional security for a woman. And in fact, if a woman doesn't have loyalty from a man, all other levels of security are basically almost close to zero, if not close to zero. Because think about it this way, if you're a woman and you're dating a guy who, let's say, makes a lot of money, right, but he can't keep it in his pants, and as soon as you walk outside the door, he's checking out every ass in the neighborhood, like you feel like you're constantly anxious and on edge, like, oh, he might leave me any second for someone else. That does not give a woman any sense of security. I don't care how rich the guy is. The only way that she can get a minimum amount of security from this kind of a guy is if she gets the contract, right? The marriage, in which case she's only putting up with it to get the money. That's it. But again, so if their emotional security is not there, nothing is there, really. And then, of course, there's closely linked to this, there's the psychological security. Again, a guy who's not abusive, it goes hand in hand with emotional security, right? A guy who respects your boundaries. Like, if it doesn't matter what the woman says, if a woman expresses a personal boundary, right? Like, let's say she says, I don't know, I don't like you chewing gum while I'm watching my TV series, all right? This is a very simple sort of example, and you keep doing it even more just to annoy her. That's immature, that's stupid, and it's also an example, all right? It's a very simple sort of silly example of what boundary respecting means, right? So if you are with a guy where you constantly have to tell him the opposite because he likes to get into power plays and do something to annoy you just because it makes him happy. First of all, this person is likely high on narcissistic traits, right? So again, this is not respecting someone's boundaries, right? Or let's say bringing up a painful topic that you don't want to hear about, and the guy keeps bringing it up, right? Again, a sign of disrespect. A sign of like not having respect for the person's emotional boundaries and psychological boundaries, right? Like if you say, I don't want to talk about, I don't know, whatever, insert painful memory here, and the person keeps bringing it up, that's disrespectful, right? So things like these, all right, maybe not the best examples, but these are things that I would put in the categories of emotional and mental, psychological security, right? So, in other words, women need to feel like they can trust the guy that they're with completely. And again, this shit is non-negotiable. See, I'm going to get here to the part where why people are so confused, quote unquote confused. I don't understand what the confusion is about, but that's because I'm going to blow my own horn a little bit here. I'm a very rational person, all right? Contrary to what you might expect from someone who has an astrology channel. I also have a degree in engineering, by the way, and I have aced exams in physics and math before. So I am I am capable of being very logical, all right? Even though a lot of people may think of astrology as woo-woo. But yeah, I am a logical person and I see things very clearly. I don't understand where the confusion is. What I see very clearly, and I've actually mentioned this in some of the other videos that I did, I'm pretty sure the one where I talked about hypergamy. What I see very clearly is that men nowadays, and not just nowadays, but like for a few decades now, basically since women started to get rights, like really get rights, you know, because I'm not just talking about when women got the right to vote, like in the 1940s. And even then, of course, it was just a small percentage of the female population of the world that got the right to vote, and the right to pursue an education. But see, when the joke really started to thicken, you know, was in the 60s and the 70s, when a lot of women started to move towards independence, you know, and pursue education, and basically started to focus on, you know, having things of their own as opposed to depending on men completely. So that's when men started to flip the coin, you know, like to flip let's say, not the coin, the page. I think it's a phrase, right? Like they started to flip the page on women, and they started to realize, you know, the plot thickens. They're actually serious about this. They're going to work. They're going to school. They're no longer so much, this focused on, you know, pleasing us all the time. So what men are doing is basically blackmailing women nowadays. There's basically like this trend of men acting like, oh, they are willing to give women security in relationships. It's just that their condition for that is for women to give up their human rights, you know? And this is actually what you see by and large happening in the world. You see men who are either incredibly primitive, you know, they're like still living in 2000 BCE, and they expect women to give up everything, like literally everything, in order for them to marry them. So it's like, they have this attitude of like, sure, I'm willing to give you security, but you have to quit your day job. You have to give up any kind of side income you have. Forget about your hobbies. Forget about ever reading a book. Forget about watching TV. Forget about basically ever leaving the house or ever doing anything that makes you happy as a person. From now on, you will become my personal slave, and you are going to have sex when I feel like it. And you're going to clean the house, and you're going to cook for the kids and do all this shit while they are free to do whatever they want, right? And a lot of women, as a consequence, are not having children, because if a woman doesn't get security in a relationship, it's impossible for her actually to feel comfortable in a relationship or to have kids. I see all of these like surprised podcasts and videos that where people are saying things like, how is it that so many women don't have kids by the time they're 40? And I really, looking at the state of the world and the state of relationships and dating, even looking at experiences that women I know have had, I'm surprised that there are any women having kids at all. I think they are amazing to have kids. I know women, and honestly, these are the women whose kids I envy. I swear to God, women who decide to have kids on their own, who even go through, you know, artificial insemination, you know, like I envy those kids, because you know these mothers really wanted those kids if they're willing to go against society, not get any security, risk their financial freedom, like, and go through all this shit, you know, the criticisms of the world to have a child. You know, these women are determined to have children, you know. You definitely know that child was wanted. Contrast that to women who get pregnant just to lock a guy in financially so that he stays there at their home and keeps paying the bills, like so many women have done throughout history, right? Let's be honest. I'm not gonna get into it, but I've seen this shit happening in my own family, so you can't tell me anything. Like, and of course, women are very good at manipulating men, because I see a lot of confused men out there who say things like, oh, but I know this woman and that woman who is like very happy being a housewife. I would suggest that you watch Mona Lisa Smile, because this is what that movie is about. Basically, women who are forced to act happy in order to avoid being raped and killed, or submitted to a life of complete ostracization by choosing not to marry, you know? And it's like, again, this is a huge reason why women are not having kids, because they're not getting their basic biological needs met. It's as simple as that. The reason why there is confusion is because men act as if women asking for security in relationships somehow contradicts feminism, but it doesn't. All right? Feminism originally was never a movement for, you know, ignoring biological realities. It wasn't about women taking out their uteruses or uteri. What the hell is the plural for that? Like, isn't uteri? Anyway, it's not about women taking out their uteri, whatever, and men starting to have periods, right? It was about women having the rights, as it was stated, the right to vote, the right to have a life of their own, to get an education, to have their own money. Because without these things, they were basically living a life of forced prostitution. All right. There was this, I'm not a communist, by the way, but there's one part that I never thought actually that I would have anything in common with the communist Marxist agenda. But one thing that I do agree with, and in fact, it was Marx who actually said this, that marriage is prostitution. However, I don't fully agree with it, right? I partially agree. I would say marriage is prostitution in a society where women are not given the right to sustain themselves financially. And in that situation, marriage is absolutely a form of prostitution. The only difference is that you're selling your sexuality to one man as opposed to, you know, random guys at the street corner or nowadays OnlyFans, right? It's the same thing, because if you don't have your own money and you're living in a society that doesn't allow you to get an education, doesn't allow you to get a job, or if you do get a job, they make sure that you don't make enough money to support yourself, right? Because, for instance, women in the 1800s who were seamstresses, and during the Industrial Revolution, who did different jobs, they were governesses or whatever, they made shit money, right? Of course, they made maybe the 20th part of what a man made, worked their asses off for pennies, barely scraping by, living in squalor if they didn't manage to find a husband. So this is how society coerced women into marriage. It was by not giving them any opportunities to make their own money, right? And kind of saying, see, you have to obey your abusive prick of a husband sometimes. I'm not saying that they were all abusive, but let's be honest, society, history has proven, and look at what's happening right now. You don't need to look at history. Look at what's happening in Afghanistan. Look at what's happening in Iran. Whenever men have the option to abuse women for fun and know that they can get away with it, they do exactly that. Really. So this is why I don't understand these women who are, anti-feminism. But again, I kind of digressed off topic. Yeah, it's still on topic. It's a related topic. But I don't understand these so-called, what do they call themselves? Traditional wives, trad wives. I haven't seen a single woman like that making a video and saying, moving to Afghanistan, #feeling blessed. I want to see that with my own eyes. No, because none of them would actually want to live without feminism. What they actually want to do is to live in some kind of utopian la-la land where they have all of the freedom of a feminist society and none of the responsibilities. So it's kind of like being free to have an education, to travel, to have, to have different experiences, to have your own house, your own car, and yet have a sugar daddy to pay for everything, right? Which shows the emotional maturity of a 3-year-old. You basically have two main options in life as a woman. You can sell your sexuality for survival, or you can work. That's pretty much it. Whether you call it marriage, whether you call it OnlyFans, whether you call it whatever, if you are not making money through something that has to do with your skills and your intelligence and your efforts, as opposed to selling your body, then you're basically, one way or another, a hooker. There's no other way to put it. Not that I'm exactly judging women either, because I understand many times women end up in these situations because, again, they never had decent role models, because they are born in societies where they're not encouraged. I know what I'm talking about. I grew up in a relatively westernized environment, still Eastern Europe, in the 90s and the 2000s, and I've seen constant discriminations between the way that even teachers treated boys versus girls. I will never forget the math, professor that I had in high school, who, by the way, the best students in math in my class were women. It was like this other girl and it was me. And there was, I think, 1 or 2 other girls who were very good at math. The best ones in math were women. And yet, when there was a math competition happening on the county level, he went over to the 4 guys in our classroom and he said, which one of you boys wants to enlist for this math competition? And by the way, those guys were complete idiots. The only thing that they were idiots in math. The only thing that they had that was kind of an extra was that they were maybe a little bit better in informatics. I'm not talking about programming. I'm talking about, using MATLAB, which is some shit that you can learn in like a weekend if you really apply yourself. The bottom line is, he didn't even consider taking a girl. And I remember at that time, I actually didn't even think about it at that time. At first, I just thought, I guess he just likes these guys and he sees them as having potential. But later, like years later, when this memory came to my mind, I was like, wait a minute. It's like chauvinism is so institutionalized that a lot of people don't even realize how often women and girls are discriminated against in society. And if this would happen nowadays, first of all, it would not be allowed to happen nowadays, in most areas of the West, at least, for a teacher to clearly say, well, I'm only going to take the boys for the competition. But for most of history, if this happened literally at the turn of the 21st century, then what can you expect? And what can you expect when other cultures still treat women like lower mammals, right? So since I have digressed and I've turned this a little bit into more about feminism and basically why feminism is still necessary, unfortunately, because you see all this crap about like, oh, what do feminists have to complain about? Like, because honestly, if I lived in a world where I never felt discriminated based on my gender, I would never talk about feminism. There would be nothing to talk about, right? We would just be moving on to more important topics, right? But as long as you still see all kinds of BS like this, what I've just described and what I've also described in other videos, particularly the one where I talked about the so-called pretty privilege, where you see a lot of girls who are pretty being harassed and forcibly kicked out of jobs because they refuse to give in to the boss's sexual advances. I've seen stuff through, maybe not, firsthand, actually. Some of them were firsthand. A lot of them through secondhand experiences from people that I know who told me they had to quit jobs, women who had to quit jobs because their bosses put the moves on them. And when there was no way for them to fight back, because I know it's like very easy for people to say, well, why don't they fight back? If you live in a chauvinist environment and the entire boys club of the company is united in calling you crazy and denying everything you say, it's pretty goddamn difficult to fight for your rights. All right? Unless you have the luck and the perseverance to record a guy doing something inappropriate or saying something inappropriate. But anyways, I digress. So a lot of this confusion comes about men not understanding that women need security. If you look at a lot, and I've actually talked to quite a few men over the years who were single and complaining about it. And let me tell you, every single one of these men are men who are not willing or not able to give women a sense of security. It's as simple as that. Well, that's what it all boils down to. These are the kinds of guys who expect women to sleep with them within the first 3 dates. And that's another thing. And men blame, the corn industry. And for those of you who are confused, just replace the C with a P, and you know what I'm talking about. They blame the corn industry, they blame the media, they blame feminism for the fact that they can't get relationships. But the truth is, they have nobody to blame but their own ignorance. I mean, basically what you see in the dating world right now is like the equivalent of men getting cats and then preparing a fish tank for it. It's literally that stupid. It's like, I mean, when you think about it, even when you get a cat, like a literal cat, you take time to study the animal. You take time to understand, what does this cat need, right? You understand that it will need things to scratch, that it will probably be active around midnight because it's nocturnal. You understand that it needs a litter box. You understand it needs to spread its scent on different objects. You understand it needs a certain diet, right? A certain conditions that the animal needs. You wouldn't get a cat and then expect it to thrive in a fish tank. Nobody would be that dumb. And yet what you see in relationships is very similar to this. Like, you see men who expect women to act completely outside of their nature, right? To basically thrive in an environment that is not naturally their thriving environment. If a woman doesn't get security from a man, she doesn't get anything from a guy. And that's another thing. Another thing is that because of the media has brainwashed both men and women, by the way, because I'm going to get more into the women part later, but it has brainwashed men into thinking that they can expect sex like within the first month of meeting, which is retarded. And I will get into why women put up with it a little bit later as well. Let me tell you something. For a woman, having sex before a guy gives her a sense of security is just as unnatural as driving a car with the brakes on. There's literally no pleasure in her. I don't give a shit, because I know you might have, oh, that's not true, because I had I've actually said this to both men and women throughout my life, and I would get protestations like, women who say things like, well, that's not true. I can have sex without feelings, which I'm not saying that you can't. There's not going to be a supernatural force that keeps you from doing it, but it's not healthy. And whether you want to admit it or not, it will take a toll on you mentally, emotionally, and even physically, right? I don't think it's a coincidence that most of the women that I've come across, and even when you look at famous people, look at Marilyn Monroe and a bunch of other famous women who had fertility issues, these are also the women who are the most promiscuous. Because again, it's not natural. A woman's body was not designed to have sex before she gets security. And whether the fact that you can say, well, I can do it either way as a woman, you can do that just as we do all kinds of shit that is not natural to us in today's world, right? Like the fact that we can stay up all night, we can do that. There's no supernatural forces that are going to stop us from doing it. But it does take a toll on us if we work night shifts our entire lives. In fact, speaking of night shifts, because I have worked them, I remember reading a study that said they shave off something like 15 years off of your lifespan, depending on how many night shifts you've been working in for how long. Because our bodies are mechanical objects, just as any mechanical object in the universe, right? If you buy a refrigerator and you leave it in the snow for 3 months, you wouldn't expect it to work perfectly, right? Because the refrigerator has parameters of ideal functioning. And the manufacturers are probably not going to think that you leave it in the snow for 3 months. And everything gets rusty. The circuits won't work anymore. God, maybe nowadays they make refrigerators that work in the snow. Who knows? Although that would seem kind of superfluous. But, you catch my drift. Every mechanical object has parameters of ideal functioning. For a woman, parameters of ideal functioning, healthy parameters on every plane. For a woman to be healthy in a relationship, security has to come first. Reproduction is later. That is the way biology has built women. That is how instincts work for women. All right. Just as in nature, you don't see a bird being like, honey, I think we should lay our eggs in the bushes and then take on a bank loan. And maybe a year from now, we're going to move into our nest. No, the bird doesn't do that. You want to know why? Because nature has programmed it to understand that it needs the warmth of a nest for the chicks to be protected and to have the proper conditions of development. The bird is not going to be stupid enough to leave her eggs in the bushes because that's a waste of time and energy, right? She knows that she knows instinctively that the eggs are going to be either eaten by a predator or even if they're not eaten by a predator, they're going to not be able to develop properly because they don't have the warmth of the nest, right? So the bird, which is a lower creature, not even a mammal, has the common sense to understand the nest comes first, sex comes later, right? I actually was watching a documentary about puffins ages ago, and puffins are these birds that basically nest in the crevices and like little caves in rocks right above the sea. And the mating season for these birds is really funny because males fight over who has the best cave. So males basically find a gallery in the rocks, and sometimes they even duel one another over who has the best cave, right? And the way that the mating season goes down is females fly from one cave to another. The male sits there like a doorman next to the entrance, and the female goes into the galleries and inspects the gallery, right? Every little crevice. So she's going in there like kind of like a woman checking it for an apartment. I can put my vanity table here. This would make a nice closet. All right, this will be the child's room. And if she likes the cave, she goes out and says, all right, this is the one I'm going to mate with. Basically, and that's when they basically hitch together. Not before. And again, these are birds, all right? These are birds. And I stress this, for birds, it's not even that important to have security, because if the bird, let's say, lays an egg and it goes bad, doesn't hatch, gets eaten by a predator, doesn't affect her. It doesn't affect her that much, right? Because she has left the egg, all right? She can lay the egg wherever. For a female, a human female, it's much worse, because if a woman gets pregnant, there are all kinds of health risks connected to that pregnancy. If something, heaven forbid, happens with the pregnancy and she doesn't have the money, the security, the connections, the support to fix that problem, she's going to go down with the ship. So a woman's need for security is way higher than it is for a bird. And yet you see birds have the common sense to not have sex with a male who doesn't provide security. And loads of women in the world do not have that common sense. That's the sad reality. And on top of that, women make the mistake of thinking that men are intelligent. They're not particularly intelligent. Not when it comes to mating, all right? Women fail to realize that basically for men, sex is the main thing that they get out of a relationship. The main thing. It's sex and children. And again, this has to do with evolutionary biology to a large extent. Nowadays, things are changing. Don't get me wrong. Yes, men will care a lot more nowadays about personality and, abilities and all that stuff because the world is changing and we are adapting to our environment. Yes. However, instinctively, biologically, that's the main thing that they get out of a relationship because for most of human history, a woman did not increase a man's finances, did not increase maybe his social status, okay? But for most of human history, his survival, his status did not depend on his wife. And that's totally different than what reality looked like for women. For women, it was the complete opposite. Her entire life depended on the kind of husband that she chose. And that was not because that's the way God intended it, the way that the religious bigots and chauvinists of the world will want you to believe. That is because it's simple, very simple physics. It's because men are physically stronger. It's because they banded together and they decided to control women. It's as simple as that. It's not because that's the way God intended it and any of the shit. This is why you see things changing now. You see women succeeding in all kinds of fields that they've never succeeded in. A large reason why men are ruling the world as opposed to women is simply because they stick together. That's it. It's not because they have higher physical strength. Do you realize that we as a species have basically hunted down and killed into extinction, have hunted into extinction species that were like maybe 20 times our size? Like think about the difference between a human and a mammoth. And the mammoths are dead. Like, if physical strength were some kind of measure of God-given superiority, the world would be run by mammoths, by dinosaurs, by bears. But no, we succeeded not because of physical strength as a species. We succeeded because of intelligence. So don't buy into this brainwashing, whether it's religious or just sheerly chauvinistic, that somehow because men have higher physical strength, you should obey them. What in the actual fuck is this? I'm going to offend a lot of religious people and I don't care. But I've actually had the same argument with a religious person at some point. And I said this, if God intended me to listen to something, a creature, just because this creature has higher physical strength, then God intended me to worship bears or cows or any other animal that is physically bigger than me, right? If I run into a bear and I'm in a forest, I will be temporarily nice, maybe, because I realize it has the strategic advantage. But as soon as it gets out of sight, I'm not going to be thinking, wow, I'm so in admiration and in awe of the bear, right? Like, I think a bear is superior. No, I'm still going to think of them as lower mammals, because I will still think that, okay, this is a lower intelligence, but, it has the superiority of strength. Okay, so I have to be nice to it temporarily until I get rid of it. And this is what's happening to a large extent in the world today, and what has happened between men and women for most of human history, whether men want to see it or not, that women have manipulated men. Like, women always manipulate men because, men are physically stronger and they band together. But this leads me to another topic, which is the topic you see being brought up today with respect to respect, right? You see a lot of men being butthurt and saying that women no longer respect them. Women never respected you, all right? I realize that I'm generalizing. I'm not talking about everyone here. But, when it comes to the topics, like when you hear men who are like, women don't respect us. And what I've actually seen is that a lot of these men who say that are usually guys who are exactly the kind of primitive chauvinist that I was just describing. The kind of guy who thinks that because he has physical strength and he benches, 200 pounds at the gym, like somehow I'm supposed to worship the ground that he walks on, which is ridiculous. For the same reasons that I just talked about earlier, I wouldn't worship a bear because it's bigger than me. So I'm not going to worship someone just because they're bigger than me physically. And in fact, intelligence, and it has been proven statistically that on average, the IQ between men and women is about the same. The only difference is that men have more representatives that have below average IQ, and they have more representatives that have above average IQ, right? So there are more men who have like, I think when I talk about above average, I'm talking not above average. I'm talking about genius IQ. So like there are more men who have an IQ of like, let's say over 170 or something like that, as opposed to how many women have that IQ. Which doesn't really mean much with respect to worthiness, right? Doesn't mean, because most people who have an above average, like somewhere between 110 and 100 and let's say 40, 50, you know, these are the majority of the people who are basically holding the world on their shoulders. Because the people who have a very high IQ, you know, it's not necessarily true that they're going to have the highest contributions. In any case, my whole rant is to say that a lot of men are acting primitively. They are acting because this is the way that they were used to in their communities, in their societies, you know, to fight each other and to, you know, I don't know, prize physical strength and aggression and military strategy and all this stuff. And a lot of this no longer means much to women, because like a lot of women nowadays, they can make their own money, they can take care of themselves, at least to the bare minimum amount that they need to survive. I'm not saying maybe that they're all thriving, but the bottom line is that, you know, women, if a woman can make enough money to survive, she can afford to not take shit. And it feels like a lot of men really don't get that. Like, either because of institutionalized chauvinism, by which they don't even realize how much of an a-hole they're being, right? Because like a lot of men, and I've noticed this when I've like witnessed other people's relationships, a lot of the times act like women should constantly make them look good, you know, even when the woman makes just as much money as he does. It's like somehow her job, especially living in Eastern Europe, you see a lot of these primitive macho sort of mentalities, and not just Eastern Europe, don't get me wrong. It's like very prevalent, of course. And I think the difference really, the more you go west, is that a lot of men just learn how to camouflage it, you know. It's not that they're not chauvinistic. It's just that, you know, they just know how to keep their mouth shut. Like, but the bottom line is, right, a lot of guys act like they are entitled. Like they're entitled to women, you know, sacrificing their lives and sacrificing their happiness and every little thing to impress them and to make them happy. When in reality, they fail to realize that the reason women did this in the past was because they were forced to. It's not because they were happy doing it. The fact that they think that, oh, women were happy to serve their husbands and never pursue their interests and never have hobbies and never care about anything except housework and children, just shows you how deeply rooted the slavery and abuse of women has been in the collective subconscious. This whole idea that women should just be happy with the breadcrumbs that men throw at them. Like, it's really disgusting, I swear to God. And it's unbelievable how many men still have these kinds of mentalities. And these are also, of course, a lot of the times the men who will complain about being single. But the truth is that they make no effort to understand women's needs, to understand women's perspectives. I mean, when you think about it, men nowadays, and for let's say a few decades now, are in an unprecedented situation of actually having to consider women's thoughts and feelings and their perspective on reality. Because for most of human history, the sad truth is that women didn't have a choice. Like, women were forced into selling themselves basically for survival. So they spent their entire lives faking stuff. Again, going back to the Mona Lisa Smile movie. If you see that movie, it's basically about the same thing. It's this idea that, you know, and the action of the movie, I think, was taking place in the 1950s, if I'm not mistaken, 50s, 60s, somewhere along those lines. And it was precisely about, you know, this difference, this shift of mentalities between the existing generations of women and the younger generations of women who were going to college and questioning their, you know, paths in lives and all this stuff. And it boils down to exactly that. Like, most women for most of human history had to be nice, had to be putting on a fake smile and pretend to care about sex when they didn't, and pretend to want children when they didn't. Do you know how many women I've seen? And I, as a woman, and also, again, I'm going to blow my own horn a little bit, because I have a very sharp intuition. I've never come across anyone who has successfully deceived me for, let's say, for an extended period of time, all right? When I look at a woman, I can read exactly what she's thinking, and maybe not exactly like word for word, but I can tell a person's, mentality, their attitude, their thoughts, and everything a lot from their mimicry, the way they hold themselves, the way they walk, the way they talk, like everything, a person's posture and everything sends you a lot of messages. And what I've seen with women in relationships who are more, quote, traditional, end quote, is that these women constantly micro control every little gesture, every mentality, every thought, every spoken word to make the men around them happy, comfortable, you name it, especially their partners. I'm talking about romantic relationships, especially. Sometimes even around men in general. I mean, if you look in the world, there are loads of women who are incredibly fake, and they spend their entire lives, perfecting this outer persona who, lives to impress men, because they know that that's the way to get the most attention, the most money, or at least to just be left alone, because men generally, if they see these women who are like acting like they're desperate for male attention, like if they see a woman who's, all dolled up and she has like hair extensions and makeup and high heels and her boobs are hanging out, they see these women as kind of like, submissive women, women who cannot make a move without getting male attention or male approval. So they're not threatened by them on any level. And a lot of these women mistakenly think, oh, men are nice to be this way. Or men, worst of all is when you hear women say like, oh, I'm getting more respect for men by acting feminine, quote unquote, when in reality, it's not respect, it's convenience. It's just that you're not threatening. You look like someone who's already kind of beaten into submission. You can't exist without some other people's approval, in this case, men in general. So you're not a challenge to them. This is why they attack women who are outspoken and feminist, women who look like they don't care about what they look like, right? Those are the women who actually get the most shit, especially if they're naturally pretty as well. Men almost act like women have some kind of an obligation to constantly look attractive for them or something. I'm talking about the chauvinists of the world, okay? I'm not generalizing, because I know I don't want to get like, comments in the comment section, but that's not true, because I'm a man and I don't, or like I know this man I'm not trying to say that all men are assholes. I'm talking here about the people who are complaining about being single, mostly. Those kinds of men, or the kinds of men who are confused about why women no longer want to invest so much in relationships and kids and all this stuff. And going back to security, all right. Let me put it to you like this. I think I mentioned this already, but I'm going to say it again. There's literally nothing. This is why so many women are single. This is why so many men are single. That's another thing. Going back to the assumption that, men have, wait, let me phrase it like this. I hear a lot about these like incel stuff. Like, again, incel I think is a very US thing. I don't know if I've heard it in other cultures, but again, so I live in Europe and I'm not, I've never been to the US or anything. But of course, if you click on one video that talks about a subject, you will have 1,000 videos in your recommended videos that talk about the same topic. So I've had just maybe a few weeks ago, had like an influx of videos talking about things like incels and the decrease of, not just the decrease of natality, but the, how many men are single, right? And I assume that the studies were about the US, but actually trends all over the world show that there are more cases of people being single, especially among young people, than there have been in the past. And to me, this is first of all, a complex issue. But again, sticking to the topic of relationships between men and women and what men have to change is that, again, men don't give women any sense of security. That's what it boils down to. What you see in the world today is that basically men expect women to give everything, to make themselves vulnerable, to sleep with them, to get emotionally involved, waste God knows how many years of their lives, hoping that maybe this guy will decide to put a ring on their finger. Bullshit. Like, this is complete and utter bullshit. This is the reason why natality is going down, all right? It's not rocket science. This is, I would say, the main reason, all right? There are other factors, of course, like, you know, like I said, socioeconomic, whatever, lifestyle changes. Yes, these things do play a part. But the main thing when it comes to relationships is because women are not getting their needs met. It's as simple as that. And when you see these like so-called incel videos, they're so moronic because the only thing they talk about is how men are not having sex. That's it. So the definition of an incel, by the way, it comes from involuntary celibacy. And it says men are not having sex. Oh my God. Well, the reason they're not having sex, let me explain it to you very simply, is because they're not willing to put in the work. It's as simple as that. Men are not willing to give women security. And then they complain about hypergamy. I've talked about this in the video on hypergamy, and I'm going to extend or expand on that topic. I did mention there, hypergamy is an evolutionary adaptation for women to survive. I've said this in the video that 1,000 years ago, if you would have been, 2,000 years ago, if you would have been Caesar's whore instead of, you know, the loyal wife of a foot soldier in the Roman Empire, you had much higher chances of survival. It's as simple as that. This is why women care about status. It's because men created societies where women had no power, no finances, no safety, and then what women turned mercenary. And this is what's happening nowadays. And I've said this in this video. I'm not surprised that a lot of these like incel videos and hypergamy videos come from the US, which I have read is a country where there is almost no social mobility. In other words, if you are born poor in the US, you have no chance of getting out of poverty. And then on top of that, there is sexism, institutionalized sexism, right? So if you are born a poor woman in the US, the only chance you have to get out of it is to marry a rich guy or to start OnlyFans, basically. I'm kind of generalizing it. I'm sure, of course, there have been cases. Let's not forget, if you're talking about, well, what about women who worked hard and got study grants and scholarships? Let's not forget that not every woman has an IQ of above average, right? So not every woman has the option of, first of all, being able to pursue higher education, to work hard. And even if she is able and willing, it's an uphill battle, right? It's like, and I speak as a woman, again, having an engineering degree, working in corporate environments, women are absolutely discriminated against on every plane. You know, whenever they have the chance to hire a guy or to give a promotion to a guy above a woman, the boys' clubs will stick together and they will give it to the guy. They will not give it to the woman, no matter how hard you worked, no matter how intelligent you are. They won't even listen to your fucking case. All right? They're going to give it to one of the boys as long as they go play ping pong on Saturdays and they're buddies. Don't give me this, you know, bullshit, like that women have equal opportunities. Anyway, I digress. And this is, in my opinion, why women are becoming extremely hypergamous. And this is why you see that women are dating guys who have a lot of money. Why do you think that is? Number one, because women are severely discriminated against still in society. You know, it's like what happens in the West is that women have rights on paper, right? So, but what you find if you scratch under the surface is that nobody protects your rights. I mean, rights don't mean anything, or laws don't mean anything unless they are enforced. There was a case a few years ago in Spain, a decade ago, I don't remember. A woman was, I'm not going to say gang, our word, on CCTV camera. And that guy, the guys actually in question were left to go away unpunished because the woman appeared to not put up a fight. That was according to the judge. I don't know if you heard about this case, and it sparked massive protests of feminists coming out on the streets in Spain. And you see this shit happening all the time where, you know, women are threatened, they're bullied, they're abused. And if they go to complain about it, they're asked what they were wearing. All kinds of disgusting injustices happening on a regular basis. And this is just talking about physical safety, which is only the most important thing. But forget about physical safety. Again, going to the corporate environment, to, job, workforce. Again, harassment is very common, prevalent. I saw a documentary just before the pandemic in 2019 about Asian countries and how common harassment, sexual harassment is at work in India and a lot of Asian countries. There was this one Asian country where, I don't remember which one it was, young men encourage one another to, again, gang R-word women in public as a kind of challenge to prove how manly they are. And the police is not doing anything about it, all right? Or if they're doing anything, it's like, whatever, asking some questions around the neighborhood. And you see this shit happening, women being discriminated against on a regular basis. By the way, do you think that that had happened to a guy, the incident from Spain? If a guy would have been, R-word in group on CCTV, do you think that he would have been, the guys in question would have been let off the hook and because he seemed to not be putting up a fight? Like, it's like, I don't believe it, honestly. I just don't. I don't believe it, all right? Because, again, those guys were able to get away with it because the victim, was a woman. This is this is what you see, not just in the Western world, all over the world. Women are constantly discriminated against. Their rights are not protected, right? And they're gaslit that this is a feminist society. This is not a feminist society. Get the fuck out of here. You want to see a feminist society? Put women in charge. Then you will see a feminist society. Then you will see the mother effing, feminist inquisition take place. Okay, maybe without the witch hunts. Then you will see a feminist society. You can't say that women have rights if the rights are not enforced, right? Then let's not even talk about legislations. I've actually said this to a woman from the US. Again, I'm totally, ranting here. Sorry about this, but since I'm on this topic, it's a very, how should I put it? It's a topic that I'm very passionate about, obviously, being a woman and having experienced injustices, having seen a lot of other women experience even worse injustices and seeing perpetrators get away with things. It really pisses me off. And let me just say that, where was I going? Wait, I had to take a break. Right. The topic of self-defense. I was actually having an argument on a forum discussion with this woman from the US who was anti-guns. I know, I'm going there, okay? Again, I don't care. You can be pro, you can be con, whatever. I know that there are pros and cons to anything, but let me just explain things to you. In Europe, for instance, we don't have the right. You can get a permit. Yes, if you apply, there are loopholes upon loopholes, so you can get a weapon. The problem is that you can't defend yourself using a weapon. Think about that for a second. And I've actually said this to a woman, you idiot. Literally, you idiot. Do you realize that gun laws are actually feminist laws? And I'm going to explain why. Because if you don't have a gun, and most importantly, if you don't have the right to legally use it in self-defense, you're expected to fight off a guy who's maybe twice your size, or maybe multiple guys, literally, with your bare hands. The legal system, for instance, in my country and in most of Europe is such that basically if I, as a woman, let's say I'm actually, and by the way, if you're thinking I'm talking out of my butt, I know cases that have happened even a few years ago, in the past 2-3 years since the pandemic, where women have been attacked, assaulted in broad daylight, and they were put in impossible situations. 1 or 2 maybe narrowly managed to escape because they were very lucky and intelligent. But they basically were put in impossible situations where if they had fought back against an assailant, they would end up in prison. Because the legal system here does not allow you to defend yourself against an assailant by use of a weapon. So in other words, unless the guy also has a weapon. So like if a guy comes at you with a gun, then you have the right to use a gun. If a guy comes at you, let's say with his bare hands, you do not have the legal right to use a knife or a gun or any kind of instrument to attack him. Because if you do, and he ends up dead or in a coma, you actually have very high chances of ending up in prison. This is the way that the legal system is in places where you don't have gun laws. All right. So when I hear these like complaints about like, at least if you have a gun, it's fair game. I mean, do you realize that even in international boxing matches, they will not make a featherweight fight against a heavyweight, right? This is why they have categories, because any moron can see that the heavyweight has a natural advantage, right? But the way that the legal systems are in most countries in the world is that you as a woman who's 5'2", 5'3", right? The average height for a woman is 5'4", I think, in Europe, and maybe 100 and what is it, like 60, somewhere between, let's say 60 kilograms, but that's a stretch. like about 165 centimeters, 60 kilograms, let's say. And you are expected to fight off a guy who is 100 kilograms and 1.85 meters with your bare hands, according to the law. And they say that this is feminism. They say this is equality. Bitch, this is not equality. And you know damn well it is not equality, all right? Because again, how is it that you apply one law to the boxing matches of the featherweight and the heavyweight, where you clearly see, I mean, if a smaller guy, this is true for men as well, right? If a smaller guy gets jumped by a much bigger guy, you would see it's an unfair fight. But it's like, according to the legal systems of many countries, they act like, oh, if a woman is jumped by a much bigger guy, she should fight him off with her bare hands. Otherwise, she's not feminist enough. Otherwise she's just proving that she belongs in the kitchen. Anyway, I totally digress. This is what I'm talking about. These are just some examples of how women are discriminated against on a regular basis. And this is without even talking about, again, workplace discrimination, all this shit. So in other words, men are constantly making sure that women stay unsafe, unseen, deprived of opportunities, in a powerless position. And then they complain when women become mercenary and they say, if you don't show me the money, if they're like, show me the mother effing money, I will not waste a single minute of my existence unless you are proving that you can pay my bills for the next 5 years. And they're complaining. You want to know why? Because again, this is what I was really getting at. The main reason why women care so much about money, and you see so many women saying things like, well, I want my husband to make, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of euros per year or American dollars or whatever. The reason why is because the way that society has become nowadays and the dating environment has become in most westernized countries is such that women, the only thing men can offer women that they really need is money. This is a very harsh reality, but a lot of people should, basically, and let's be honest, I think a lot of women, if they take a moment to think about it, they'll be like, yes, accurate. And you want to know why? The situation has changed from like 50, 60, 70 years ago. Because you hear a lot of guys say things like, well, women nowadays, they all want to marry billionaires, or they all want to marry guys who are established, quote unquote. They won't even give a chance to a guy who is starting out. Let's say he's like 20 to 25. He's going through university, maybe has a job, but he doesn't have like huge amounts of resources. You want to know why? Because these guys in today's world do not offer you any security. And this is a huge shift from previous generations, because like 50, 60, 100 years ago, in my grandmother's generation, who both my grandmothers were born in the 1920s, back in those days, the reason women would marry a guy who was like 20 and broke was because she had the security that this guy is gonna stay with her until the end of her life. That's why. Nowadays, a lot of women, they marry a guy that they met in university or something. As soon as the guy hits VP of whatever company, he decides he's bored. He wants to file for divorce. He leaves the woman with her 2 kids. After the woman has spent most of her youth, helping him and building up the family and the home and taking care of things and at least part of the housework. And the guy can just decide, I'm bored. I want a younger woman. He can divorce and give her nothing. Unless there is a prenup, of course. Sorry, not if there is a prenup. I mean, depending on where you live, of course. In the US, it's probably if you don't have a prenup. This is why women care about money. Because they don't have any security anymore. This is why. Nowadays, and I've actually known cases like this, believe it or not. An acquaintance of my sister, for instance, she married a guy. So this woman was pretty well off financially. So she was running her own hair salon. She married a guy who didn't have a lot of money. I think he was in his 20s, I don't know. They were probably around the same age. I'm not 100% sure. But he was like, or I think, I don't know, he was working and then decided to quit his job. And she decided to support him to go through law school. So she was supporting him financially while he was going through law school. As soon as he started getting his footing in his career as a lawyer, he filed for divorce, found a younger woman, and she was by this time in her 40s, like late 30s, early 40s. And these cases are not unheard of, where women decide, I'm going to date a guy who's like young and whatever, and then they get nothing out of it, right? This is why women now are so focused on money, because they don't get any security from their partners. It's not like I said, not like 100 years ago where marriage was for life with very few exceptions, right? It was also because of the pressures of the church, of the communities, of all the, the things that no longer exist in many places. I'm not saying that this is all bad or all good. I'm just telling it like it is. I'm looking at cause and effect here. That's the truth. In the grandmother's generations and our mother generations, these women in these generations, divorce was very rare, right? Basically, I don't know, like the man had to find his wife in bed with like the entire village, like, or like something. And that was a reason for divorce. And of course, a lot of this was not just because women were financially dependent, because, my grandmother, for instance, worked. Both my grandmothers worked. But it was the pressure of society. It was because, first of all, other men held men accountable. Their fathers raised them to know better, right? And in my parents' generations, for instance, this is why I laugh when I see these arguments of like, oh, well, feminism is to blame, for the fact that natality is going down and marriage is no longer important and women don't want to get married. And if you listen to the chauvinists of the world, they almost make it sound like feminism is, takes the blame for everything. It's like, oh God, evil feminism, feminism just, destroyed the ozone layer. It killed the dinosaurs. Feminism sank the Titanic. It killed babies. It turned women into Instagram witches who only care about cellulite massages. I'm surprised nobody blamed the pandemic on feminism. I'm pretty sure that if you look somewhere in some dark corner of the web, you're going to find some religious fanatics who say things like, or said things like the pandemic is God's way of punishing us for women's rights, I swear to God, if you listen to men out there, they blame feminism for everything. Feminism this, feminism that, everything is because of feminism. Women decided that they're human beings, and now the world's going straight to hell. But I digress. So it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous because in my mother's generations, for instance, women had the right to an education. In my grandmother's generation, they had the right to an education. Women went to university, all right? The difference is true that not many of them went to university. So in my mother's generation, and this was in Eastern Europe in the 1970s when she graduated from university, I would say maybe a quarter of women went to university. But even the ones who did go to university were married by the time they were 30. Like, it was very rare that you would see women never married, because, and the reason for this was simply that men in those generations were educated to not waste a woman's time. It's as simple as that. Men in those generations respected the fact that women had a narrow window of fertility and you didn't waste a woman's time, 5, 10 years, 15 years of her lifetime because you needed free laundry and cooking without planning to marry her. That was another thing. Living together before marriage was practically unheard of, as it should be, honestly. I think it should be. And again, I'm a feminist, 2000%. Well, okay, let me not say it should be. It depends on the situation, because some women are not even comfortable with marriage. I totally understand that. I myself am actually very mostly leaning towards not wanting to get married. But what I think men need to understand is that women need security either way, right? So, and what happened in the past was that, again, women knew that a guy would take them seriously, right? So if they started to date a guy and they were investing time, first of all, it was unheard of for men to expect sex within the first dates. Like, this is disgusting, all right? Maybe it happened. I'm not trying to say, I don't know what happened back then. I'm sure maybe some women jumped into bed as soon as they met the guy because he was so hot, whatever. But even that happened because women had the security that, oh, if a guy likes me, he's not just fooling around. He's not wasting my time. Contrast this to what is happening in today's world, where a lot of men are just constantly wasting women's time. I can't tell you how many of the women in my generation, were in relationships for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years with a guy, and then he, suddenly decided that he's bored, that he wants to find himself, that he's gay, like whatever, that he is like, one of my friends from childhood, honestly, she was in her relationship for like 6 years. She was in her first serious relationship for 6 years. And by the way she was talking about this guy, I'm sure that she planned to marry him, and they were living together. And of course, she was doing most of the cooking and cleaning and all this stuff. And guess what? One day, the guy just, decided that he is, quote, not ready for a serious relationship, end quote. Give me an effing break. Seriously? Like, he needed 6 years to know that he is not ready for a serious relationship. And by the way, when this happened, she was around 25, 26. He was around the same age. And again, for a guy, ending a 6-year relationship at the age of 26 is not catastrophic, right? Because like men can get a woman pregnant, I don't know, up until their 70s. Look at Robert De Niro right now. Like, what is he, like 80, just had a child? I'm not saying it's the ideal situation, but technically it's possible, which is not the same thing for women. If women want to be sure that they are going to have kids at all, they technically should be in a stable, secure relationship by the age of 35 at the very latest. The more they wait after that, the higher the chances are that they won't be able to have children. Not naturally anyway, without some science fiction stuff happening. And of course, expensive treatments. And sometimes, of course, women have fertility problems even when they're young. I've seen that happen all the time, and I'm sure a lot of people see that happening as well. And that's because of how unhealthy our lifestyles are. And especially for women, how they're constantly gaslit to act against their interests and their natural instincts. But let me not digress too much. But the bottom line is, yes, men in those generations, they respected women. They respected women's needs. They understood, hey, if I take a woman out for a date, I need to be prepared that this is the woman that I'm going to marry. Literally like that. How many men actually respect this nowadays? Most men, this is what leads me to this incel nonsense. Like, most men nowadays, they're complaining about not getting laid as if, first of all, as if this constitutes a relationship for both men and women. This is another thing that pisses me off. Like, when you see these, like, incel debates, they talk about how sad situations are for men because they can't get a partner, but they're only talking about sex, which, by the way, for a woman, sex without commitment, without security is nothing. It's nothing. In fact, it's worse than nothing. It's like, it's actively destructive to her on every plane. Doing nothing can be something pleasant, like watching Netflix instead of cooking and cleaning, let's say. But getting into a relationship with a guy who does not give you security at the bare minimum, by the way, I'm not saying that security is the be all and end all of what women need in relationships. Of course, every woman is different and she might need different things differently, but this is the foundation of what a woman needs. This is the bare rock, all right? If you don't give a woman security, that's like, there's nothing to build on from there. It's kind of like, think about it as the foundation of a house, right? When you start building a house, you start with a foundation. You don't start with the roof, right? It's the same thing. And if that foundation has cracks in it, it's only a matter of time before the whole thing collapses. This is what I'm talking about. So what I'm trying to say is that they act as if sex is the same thing for women as it is for men. It's not the same thing. Again, if you accept basic biology, it is not the same thing. I couldn't believe it when I saw this guy on YouTube. I don't remember what his name was, honestly, but by the looks of him, he looked like he was at least in his 40s. I'm 40 to 50. And the reason I mention his age is because I was shocked by how ignorant and stupid his answer was. Like, he was something, again, he was part of this like manosphere stuff, and he was debating some article or something that was written by a woman, where the woman was complaining about precisely similar topics to what I have discussed, meaning that she was in a relationship with a guy, she was sleeping with him, living with him, whatever, I don't know, like having fun. I think it was about the topic of who pays on the first date and whatever. And she was complaining that he wasn't paying, or something, he didn't pay for the lunch on the date, and that she, you know, basically she was like giving her side of the relationship and he wasn't providing anything. And this guy, who was in his 40s, who was, you know, commenting on this article, said something along the lines of like, well, if we have sex, that should be like a mutually enjoyable experience. Like, this should be like a, you know, almost acting like you should be grateful as a woman that you're getting laid or something. Son. And look, again, I was shocked when this guy said this, because this was a guy in his 40s or 50s. If a guy in his 40s who has been married and has had relationships can say something this goddamn ignorant, it's not a surprise that most of them are single. All right? It is not surprising at all. I would have understood maybe if this came from a teenager who doesn't know anything about women, is now trying to figure women out. But, and again, I don't entirely blame men for this, because women have their share, all right? Maybe, I don't know if I'm going to talk about it in this video. I have talked about it a little bit when I said, you know, I mean, honestly, I've said this many times to people that I've known in conversations, that I have, honestly, more respect for women who are working girls than women who sleep around with random guys. And look, I'm not trying to say that I judge them, because I know that a lot of the women who do this kind of thing come from a fucked up background, often come from a background of being molested, abused, whatever, you name it. I know that. But it is so stupid. It is like the worst thing that you can do as a woman, when it comes to relationships in general, because as long as there are women who are easy, men will never man up. They will never learn how to make women happy. The reason why so many women are miserable in relationships nowadays is because men can always count on the fact that they can go to a random club and find some, you know, woman who is confused, young, and doesn't have a father figure, or is desperate for male validation, and can take her to bed on the same evening or within a week, right? So as long as they have that guarantee of they can just get laid anytime they want, they will never man the fuck up and actually learn what women need in relationships and, you know, meet women's needs. And the consequence of this is that nobody's happy, because the women who have one night stands, and I've known women like this. I used to know a woman in university who had one night stands, and guess what? She was diagnosed bipolar, was on medication from a psychiatrist. I'm talking heavy shit. Suicidal depression. She was never happy. And in fact, I think I mentioned her in another video where I talked about the pretty privilege stuff, where on the surface, she would put on this, like, regurgitate this modern anthem of, oh, YOLO and FOMO, like, oh, I want to have different experiences while I'm young. But when she was, like, you know, in private with me, after a couple of drinks, she would complain about why she can't find a decent guy. And I almost, like, felt like saying, like, what do you expect? Like, you think you're gonna find a decent guy at 3 o'clock at the club, you know? I mean, really. And you see a lot of these women, and let's be honest, women don't need sex, all right? I'm sorry. Look, some women may have higher sex drives than others, but they don't need it. I mean, do a simple Google search and see how many women have died of horny in the past, 1,000 years. You're not going to find any women, all right? You're not going to find any men who died of horny, actually, either. Except if it was indirectly, like they were trying to impress a woman and they drove their cars into a ditch, maybe. But the bottom line is women don't actually need it. You're not going to die if you don't get laid. I mean, if you look at, this is why women have a cycle, okay? The average healthy woman will have maybe 7 days out of 28 when she will maybe think about sex a little bit. And even then, if all the stars align, you know, she doesn't have like any, she doesn't have any health problems, if she doesn't have any, I don't know, job worries and, if everything is right. And because if she does have worries, not even then will she think about it. Which actually leads me to, by the way, another important difference between men and women and what men don't understand and why women are single and men are single is that men don't understand that women need to feel safe. And in fact, there were studies that showed for women having high levels of cortisol, for instance, which is the stress hormone, actually decreases their libido, which is not the same thing that happens to men, which again makes perfect sense from a biological point of view. And that's because women, unlike men, they carry the baby when they get pregnant. So if you go through a lot of stress as a woman, high levels of cortisol, right? That's basically your body is getting the message from the sensors of your body, from your outside environment, that this is a very bad time to get pregnant. And what is the first measure that it takes? Kills your sex drive, right? Make sure that you at least don't start chasing anything, like it makes sense, right? And I've actually, can I just say again, a little bit TMI, I have definitely experienced this myself. And in fact, I didn't even have a sex drive at all until I was like about 30. Like almost at all. And then suddenly I went through a phase where I funny enough lost my job, but I had a lot of savings. I had like enough money to live off for like a year and a half. And this was before the pandemic. It's important to mention. And I went through a time when I didn't have any stress, like 1 or 2 months where I went to the swimming pool. I just tried makeup. I just did whatever I felt like. And that was like the first time in my life that I started having a sex drive. I swear to God. And guess what? That was 2019. I haven't had a sex drive since. And I'm like, and I swear to God, I know this is really TMI, but I think it perfectly illustrates, actually, and I remember this when I read this article about cortisol and everything, and I was like, oh my God, this makes a lot of sense, because for most of my life, I've been constantly stressed. And even now, my general energy is pretty high strung, like I am, I have a lot of, I also have stuff that I have to deal with. And honestly, throughout most of my life, I had little to no support. I had some basic financial support, but I had a lot of emotional stress, a lot of abuse happening. Really, there's no other way to put it. And so I grew up with like basically CPTSD, high levels of stress. I never even thought about sex when I was growing up. And this, by the way, also leads me to another funny thing is like when men talk about, women who are feminine versus women who are masculine. Like, honestly, what do you expect? The women who are so-called feminine that most men call feminine are women who come from money or women who have large support networks. They've never had to worry for their safety in their entire lives. Those are very rare specimens, by the way. Or not forget about safety. They don't have to worry about financial worries, right? They can always count on their parents to bail them out or some relatives to bail them out. They have a lot of support system, right? They can complain about stuff to other people. If a woman is on her own or has minimum support from others and she has to fend for herself, you can forget about her being feminine. And this is not about and again, I'm talking about the definitions of feminine and masculine that are given generally by society, right? And the reason why women become quote unquote masculine is because they have to fend for themselves. The qualities that we associate naturally with masculinity are basically the qualities required for any organism to survive, right? If you are an animal in the wild, you wouldn't survive by spending 6 hours looking in the mirror and putting on makeup. Right? You would survive by getting shit done, right? Going out there hunting and, hunting and killing and whatever, being savage AF, right? This is why women are becoming, quote, more masculine. And this is also funny to me when men, say things like, well, younger women are more fun. Again, why do you think younger women are more fun? Because they don't have any stress. That's why. It's not rocket science. It's like, if you look at women who are being, have rich parents who pay their college tuitions and, they don't even have to work a job to support themselves. Like, what do they have to worry about? They have a lot more time and energy to, focus on cellulite and, making themselves attractive. And I'm not saying that I would like to be like that. I'm just saying that in today's world, even the women who would like to be like that don't have the chance, don't have the choice to be like that, because men are not giving them any security. So in the absence of security, they have no choice but to roll up their sleeves and basically, get stuff done on their own. So that in turn makes men perceive them as more masculine. Like, basically my point is, men, if you want a feminine woman, you'd better get ready to pay her bills. I'm just telling it like it is, or maybe not entirely, but you have to give a lot of, security. That's the word for it. There's no other way to put it. And again, there's another thing that I wanted to say about this topic of security. I'm really all over the place. I'm sorry about this. Again, I mean, those of you who are on my channel for a while, you know that I rant. This is how I am. And this gets me to these videos that Teal Swan has put out, which really put me out. You know what I mean? The videos she puts out a lot of the times put me out. And she talks about this topic of, this topic of containment, which really cracks me up. But okay, I'm not going to talk about it in this video. I'm going to do a separate video where I talk about this because I think it's, hilarious, all right? And pretty twisted and warped the way that she sees things. But she does have videos where she talks about women needing, all right, I'm going to get into it because I don't want to beat around the bush. I have to get into it. I have to talk about this topic of containment, all right? What it seems to me in the world is that women, like I said, don't feel safe, all right? And the reason women don't feel safe, contrary to what chauvinists want you to believe, is not feminism, all right? Men who say things like, oh, well, the reason women are not happy nowadays, or the reason why women are not fulfilled, why they have to worry more, and why they have to work more is because of feminism. Honestly, that is the equivalent of an abusive husband beating the crap out of his wife and then saying, look what you made me do. That's exactly it. Basically, when men are saying feminism is to blame for what is happening to them, it's kind of like saying it's not the fault of men who abuse women. The fault is women who have dared to go against the so-called natural order, quote unquote, sometimes given through traditions of centuries, of millennia of abusing women institutionally, and sometimes, of course, enforced by wonderful religions, which, of course, have no basis in science, have no scientific proof. They're basically people arguing about whose imaginary friend is the coolest. But I digressed, right? So it's women's fault. It's women's fault because they have dared to stand up for themselves, to stop taking shit from men, right? If women would just go back to taking shit, they would be happy. Men would be willing to pay the bills. It's like, I mean, I'm sorry, but this is how it sounds to me. And when she talks, now going back to Teal Swan's theory of containment, right? She, just briefly, if you haven't heard it, I mean, you can do a simple search on YouTube, Teal Swan containment, and you will see what I'm talking about. I think she has multiple videos on it. And I remember the first time that she actually, when I came across one of her videos about this topic, and I thought, oh my God, this woman has it all backwards, And I still think the same thing. She has it all backwards, okay? And first of all, just briefly, what she says is that women are like a pearl and that men are like the shell that holds the pearl, and that women need containment like the pearl needs containment from the shell to thrive, to develop and whatever. I have a problem with this theory, all right? A huge one. Which is the fact that, first of all, well, there are multiple problems. The first one is the fact that she uses this term containment as if, she acts like she just invented the wheel, when in reality, this containment thing is just a fancy new term for protection, right? It's like saying women are unsafe and women feel unsafe, which I don't contradict. It's true. Unfortunately, women don't feel safe in the world to a large extent. I definitely have gone through loads of times in my life where I haven't felt safe, and it started with including abusing family members, and then later boys at school, and then later teachers, and then whatever. Do I need to go on? I've also had a video up, a while ago, some years ago, but I took it down in the meantime, or I made it private, I don't remember, where I talked about going through harassment at work, being, SA, as in SH, not SA. So I wasn't assaulted, I was harassed, But just to illustrate, so women feel unsafe, true, but the reason is not feminism, and the solution is not containment, all right? The solution is women's rights need to be respected, all right? Because if you're saying that women need containment, like the solution to women feeling unsafe is men need to protect them, that's basically enforcing the same age-old chauvinistic bullshit that feminism has tried to fight off for the past over 100 years, which is namely the trade-off of men giving protection and women quitting their human rights in order to get that protection. Or do you really believe so naively, and I'm addressing this hypothetically to Teal Swan, does she really believe that men will offer the so-called containment in exchange for nothing out of the kindness of their hearts? The reason men used to protect women or contain women, as she puts it, for most of human history was because women were their property, you're right? They would protect women the same way that people protect their cars, right? If someone would try to trash your car with a baseball bat or something, you would get pissed. You would get protective, right? It wasn't because they actually understood women, or that they actually wanted women to thrive, or that they actually wanted women to be happy, or they even cared about what women thought or felt at all. It was just because women were property. And ultimately, this leads me to another thing that is important, which is safety. All right. So this idea of women don't feel safe, the problem is that the reason women don't feel safe is for very real, valid reasons. I've mentioned some of them in this video. Harassment, discrimination, threats of violence, sexual violence, gaslighting, emotional unsafety. I don't know, do I need to go on? If you're not talking about a minority of women who maybe are super rich and super connected, like the Ivanka Trumps of the world, and even those women have to deal with their gross father staring at them in a sexual way, you know what I mean? It's like, unless you're talking about that minority, most women don't get safety in the world. They're not respected. They don't get basic human rights. I'm not talking about respect as in having red carpets rolled down at your feet. I'm talking about the basic human decency that you would show towards any man is not given to most women. Just to give you an example of this, how often do you see men who are attractive getting a job in a corporation being called a hoe, right? You don't see a man who's good looking getting crap for being good looking, right? In fact, I actually, again, saw another study about this, that men who are good looking get all the benefits. Speaking of pretty privilege, right? They get all the benefits of being good looking. They're seen as more intelligent, more competent, more trustworthy. Whereas women who are above average good looking are the exact opposite. They're seen as less intelligent, less competent, less trustworthy. And this is with respect to professional fields, right? So, ironically, right? And who's talking about pretty privilege? We were talking about pretty privilege, right? Men are the ones who get the real pretty privilege, by the way, because they can be pretty and they get all the advantages, and they also are not expected to prostitute themselves in exchange for financial offers or benefits, material benefits of any kind. But anyway, again, I digress. So the reason women feel unsafe is because there are real threats in the world. And the reason there are real threats in the world, to a large extent, is because men create and maintain threats against women. It's pretty obvious to me. I mean, basically, men who bring up this topic of we need to protect women are usually the biggest chauvinists on the planet. Do you think it's a coincidence, by the way, that some of the countries that are the most chauvinistic, the ones who condone violence against women. I actually read, and I don't know if this is still true, but I read this somewhere that in Saudi Arabia, if a woman gets R-word, R-A-P-E-D, that she goes to prison for indecent behavior. Can you believe this shit? That's like Jedi level of chauvinism. And yet it's these cultures, the ones who are patriarchal, quote unquote, that are the quickest to use this argument of protection. We need to protect women. You know, we need to protect them from what? Oh, you mean the men that you allow to get away with violence against women? Like, I swear to God. And I can't believe how many women fall for this shit, right? This is, you know what this is like? This is like the good cop, bad cop dynamic in movies. I don't know if you've ever seen, like, you often see this good cop, bad cop stuff in thrillers, you know, films where there's like police chases and detective work. And I actually found out that it's a real tactic. I thought it was just some Hollywood thing, but I'd actually use it in real life. So briefly, the good cop, bad cop dynamic usually happens when the police, let's say, captures a suspect and they want to put him in prison, right? Let's say they have evidence. Sometimes it may not even be that they have evidence. They just want to, you know, close the case and throw someone in prison so they can get their paychecks. And they get together, right? And they say, I'm going to play the bad cop. You're going to play the good cop. And we're going to interrogate the suspect, right? And so the strategy behind this method is that one of them plays the bad guy, right? So he is going to go in there and his job is to scare the suspect, right? So they take turns in interrogating the suspect, you know, in one of those like dingy rooms that they have, like, where, you know, those rooms at the police section from the movies where they can see the suspect, but the suspect can't see them through the window. Anyway, and they take turns, they interrogate the guy, and then the bad guy goes in there and scares the crap out of the suspect, you know? So the bad guy goes in there, like, huffing and puffing and looking tough and mean and, like, basically scaring the suspect, like, hey, all of your friends ratted out on you. We have signed confessions from your partners. You're alone. You're looking at 30 years minimum in prison. You know, like, the judge doesn't like you, you know, all this shit. Like, he tells the suspect anything to scare the crap out of him. And then the good cop comes in and the good cop acts like he's on the side of the suspect, you know? So he's like, he's going to be like on a softer tone and he's going to be like, well, you probably saw that my partner doesn't like you very much, but, you know, I'll tell you what, I like you, you know? I think you're a pretty good guy, so I'm going to cut you a deal, you know? If you sign a confession and, you know, admit to everything that we have accused you of, I'm going to make sure that you only get 15 years in prison in minimum security. Like, and usually, you know, I don't know what the success percentage is for this tactic, but in the movies, at least, it usually works, right? They get the guy's confession. This is similar to what is happening in society between men who say they want to protect women and perpetrators. So men who actually abuse women, right? The rapists, the murderers, the chauvinists, the fundamentalist religious idiots, the, you know, whatever, every little low-life scumbag, chauvinistic prick on the planet. Those are the bad guys of the world, right? And the good guys are the guys who use the argument of protection, right? Basically, what I'm trying to say is, it seems clear to me, and by the way, if you open your eyes, women, you will see evidence of this all the time. All the time. Do you know how often I've seen evidence of this? Where the good guys of the world, the so-called good guys, the ones who say we want to protect women, they are actually secretly happy when shit happens to women. They're happy when women get, again, our word, when they get assaulted, discriminated, harassed, pushed out of the jobs that they worked so hard to get. They're happy. You want to know why? Because as long as women feel unsafe, they will always go back to another man and have to depend on a man for protection. That's it. They don't actually care about the woman's happiness and well-being. Again, because if they did, they would do the right thing and they would attack the perpetrator, all right? I'm not necessarily saying physically, but at least verbally. They would point out the real problem, which is the men who are abusive towards women. They wouldn't go to the women and say, it's your fault that you got our word because you left the kitchen. These are not guys who are on your side, all right? And before you come at me with arguments, yeah, but there are always going to be abusive men, bullshit. I come from a former totalitarian state. Let me tell you something. And I'm not, by the way, not at all supporting the idea of communism or totalitarian, but I'm saying it is possible to have order in society without women having to be forced into prostitution. All right. So don't allow, I'm especially addressing this to women, don't allow men to bamboozle you into thinking that, oh, it's a utopia that can never happen. The reason why men are violent towards women in society is because they're allowed to get away with it. It's that simple. Because there are laws that condone violence against women. Like, basically, it's not a question of, like, this is not the way things are. It's not sent by God. It's not, like, supernaturally decided that, oh, women should live in unsafety and have to cling to a man for security. Let me ask you women, furthermore, to, do a little exercise of imagination. And picture this right now. If you lived in a world where you never saw instances of women being harassed, abused, discriminated against, right? You would just have total justice. You would literally be seen no different than a man. You could start a business. You could make dealerships. Nobody would question your judgment. You could prove yourself through hard work and determination. If you lived in that kind of a world, would you really need a man to make you feel safe? I think when you ask yourself that question, you realize quite simply the answer is no. And to a large extent, I almost grew up in that kind of an environment. I grew up in a post-communist era when, by and large, there was very little crime against women, or at least in the area and the time and space that I grew up in. And I don't remember ever feeling unsafe when I was a child. When I was a girl, I did, because when I was growing up, cases of kids being kidnapped, little girls getting, again, R-word and group by other older men, this shit never happened. And I'm not advocating for totalitarianism. I'm not trying to say, well, we need to have a system that, watches every little thing that we do to have a civilized society. I think it's pathetic. It's pathetic that we live in the 21st goddamn century and so many people are at the level of consciousness of animals. Like, if there is no punishment of any kind, they just act like animals. They don't see the point of following the rules, of maintaining civilization. It's like, no, it's like, if nobody stops me, I'm just gonna go, I don't know, barf on a baby because it's fun. Like, that's just an example, right? So, honest to God, I don't know, but I'm saying it's possible. The reason why men, like I said, the reason why men abuse women, some men, is because they're allowed to get away with it. It's not rocket science. If I can guarantee you right now, 100%, if we had public executions for rapists and pedophiles, every man on planet Earth would find the self-control necessary to keep their hands in their pockets, not touch women without their approval. The reason why they're doing it is because they know they can get away with it. That's it. They're not given the proper incentives, to behave properly. And again, this is why it pisses me off, honestly. Her whole theory, Teal Swan's theory about containment, are off, honestly, because she makes it sound as if women have some kind of part of their DNA that, I don't know, has like a code in it that says must latch on to male specimen to feel comfortable. Not true. The reason why women feel unsafe is because they look around. Sometimes so many women go through abuse of different kinds. So you can't blame them for feeling unsafe. And it's not supernatural. Turn the genders around. If we lived in a world where, let's say, women were bigger than men, and women would constantly assault men, discriminate against them, gaslight them, pinch their asses, I don't know, whatever, beat them up in marriages. And then on top of that, we had a legal system that favored women above men, right? If a guy gets molested in public, the police ask him what he were wearing. Men would live in high levels of anxiety and feeling unsafe as well. It's not supernatural. Any organism under these circumstances would react the same way. And I'm not disputing that maybe by this point, because women have felt unsafe for centuries upon centuries upon centuries. I mean, if you actually think about it, as sad as today's situations are, they're still better than what 99.9% of women have experienced throughout most of the previous centuries, right? And so because it's been going on for so many generations, I'm sure there maybe is a bit of a genetic component to it. Like women have some kind of an inbuilt instinct to kind of go for a man's protection. But I can guarantee you that if the environment would change, women would change within, give it 2 generations. I mean, just look at how much women have changed in the past 100 years since they were given equal rights. Now we have women astronauts and like weapon engineers and physicists and astrophysicists, things that 200 years ago, most people would have thought impossible for a woman to achieve. The point is that we adapt to our environment according to Darwin's theory of evolution. But the thing is that we can change the environment. You know, now we as a human species have the power to change the environment that we live in. So by changing the environment, automatically we also change our own behaviors and our own instincts because we are adapting to our ever-changing environment. You know what I mean? It's not like 10,000 BCE when you had to adapt to nature. Or forget about 10,000, more like, let's say 100,000 million, 100 million BCE when, you know, it's like we all lived in caves and had to completely dependent on nature and we had to submit to the laws of the jungle. It's not like that anymore. Right? So, I don't know. This is my mentality. It may seem kind of out of the box, to put it mildly. Maybe because I have Aquarius placements. I don't know. I blame it on Aquarius. Everything is Aquarius. But I actually love those lyrics by the Black Eyed Peas. You know, when Fergie says, I'm so 3008, you're so 2000 and late. That honestly, sometimes with peace and love, I'm not trying to offend anyone. I honestly sometimes feel like that. Like, I look around at people and I'm like, I don't know, why are they so hung up on trivial crap that doesn't matter? Like, we should be working on, I don't know, creating the perfect paradise on Earth instead of, you know, arguing about nonsense. Like, what? I can't believe that we are in the 21st century and we are still arguing about whether women are human beings or not. Like, what the actual fuck? I'm pretty sure that if there is a God, you know, I think he's embarrassed. I think, honest to God, if you think of God as a parent, I think I would be embarrassed by a species like ours, you know. Maybe that's why we see UFOs every now and then. I think we're on the intergalactic adoption market. You know, it's like God has put us up for adoption. They're like, you know, take this project away from me because I've had enough. I tried. I've been waiting for hundreds of millions of years. I'm not seeing much progress. Will someone please take them off my hands? All right, I jest.